A reading from the book of Genesis. The same night, he got up and he took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go, unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Midway through the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, having lost my way. Those are the opening lines, if you didn't remember, to Dante Alighieri's fantastical tale called The Divine Comedy, arguably the most important poetic work in Western civilization. If you aren't familiar with it, Dante wrote this allegory that is also a saga in 3 parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. That is, hell, purgatory, and heaven. He sees the spiritual journey of life as a movement of transformation that takes you through hell in order at last to deliver you to heaven. Because what he is saying is there's no going up without first going down and going through. But notice again how it begins. Midway through the journey of our life. Not just his midlife, but all of ours. In other words, there's something of a pattern to all of our lives that involves this descent into a dark wood, this getting lost along the way before we can truly figure out who we are and where our hope lies. Now, that isn't to say that the first part of life or the last part of life doesn't matter. Actually, midlife is more of a metaphor of meaning, isn't it, than it is an actual point of chronology. It's more of a way of describing inevitable identity crisis that all of us face. And we have hints of them early in our life and echoes of it later in our life. You know, like when the girl or the guy rejects you, or you don't make the team, or when a debilitating illness sets in, or your spouse dies first. There may be one defining moment at the midpoint or thereabouts, but there are many moments that come before and after that moment defines, because the truth of the matter is we all of us at some point or another come to camp at the river Jabbok and wrestle all night long with, and now I'm getting ahead of myself. The story of Jacob in the Old Testament is full of intrigue. Jacob will become Israel in this passage we look at today, but not before he's lived a life of deception and cunning where he has succeeded at everyone else's expense. Remember, the name Jacob stems from his grasping for the heel of his minutes older twin brother Esau, because Jacob was never content to be second. He wanted to be first in his family and basically in everything else he did. By the time we arrive at this story, Jacob has already swindled his brother out of his birthright, and then he has pretended to be his brother in order to get his father's blessing that was meant for the older son too. So after that episode, his brother the hunter, Esau, decides that Jacob should be his next prey. And so he's going to hunt him down and kill him. So Jacob hightails it for the hills, which is where his mother's family lived. And so he goes and spends 7 years in his uncle Laban's house, working for the hand of the woman he really loved, his cousin Rachel, And then after 7 years, his uncle tricks him and gives him the older sister Leah. He has to work another 7 years for Rachel, poetic justice, right? And then he works another 6 years tending Laban's flocks before he finally thinks, maybe Esau has cooled off by now, I'll go home. So he gathers everyone up, and on their way out, his wife Rachel, she absconds with her father's household goods, and it just goes to show this whole family. It's just one long con. I mean, it's like a lifetime of grand larceny. And now the jig is up, right? Jacob sends messengers ahead to see if Esau is ready to make peace with him. And the word comes back that Esau's got 400 men with him. He's heading Jacob's way, and he's still bearing a grudge. So Jacob sends everyone across the river and stays behind alone for the night. And it's a dark night of the soul. In the middle of his sleep, a man jumps him and wrestles with him all night long. Who is this man? We don't know. We don't think Jacob knows. And the truth is, that's often the way it is with nightmares, isn't it? They're kind of confusing. You're not really sure who you're wrestling with. Even after you wake up, it's not always clear at first. So at the early stages of our spiritual development, our tendency is to think that the problems with our life are somebody else. Right? We blame our father for not being more involved with us, or for being so involved that we felt like we could never please him. We look at our wife and wonder if she would just be more of this or less of that, then everything would be great. We think the reason we haven't done better in our career is that we've always had somebody holding us back. Those immigrants taking our jobs, The boss promoted his own son instead of me, right? Our teacher just didn't understand our true brilliance. Whatever. Well, Jacob may have felt like he's on the cusp of getting everything he'd hoped for, but there is still one person standing in his way, and it could all fall apart right here. Esau. Esau. Is Esau the man he's wrestling with? Now, pastors are not immune from this either, you understand. I realize you all may think that we are some subspecies of human other than the rest of you, but look, we don't like opposition. We like to be liked. I mean, maybe too much so sometimes. In fact, I'm not sure that some of us, if we were honest, didn't get into this work because we wanted the blessing of heaven, and the closest way to get it is maybe from the people on earth that come and sit in the pews. The group we call the people of God. What better group to, And then we come to a time when we feel like some of them are against us. You're supposed to be for us. And we don't sleep well. We wrestle in the night. Who are we wrestling with? The truth is, they, you, never the problem, really. Our struggle is not with Esau, however conceived. Our struggle is with ourselves. And who wants to struggle with oneself? Not I, Because see, if I struggle with myself, then I have to take responsibility for my own actions. I have to deal with my regret and mistakes. And I may not be sure I have it in me to prevail if the problem with me is me. Am I the only one confessing this morning? But in the midst of that long night of wrestling, we may find out that being created in the image and likeness of God means that we never really just struggle with ourselves or with others, because our struggle is never just with flesh and blood, right? We struggle spiritually, and it affects us physically. Which is why at the last the man Jacob wrestles with, realizing that Jacob's never going to give up, finally wounds him. He touches him in the hip socket and throws it out of joint, causing a wound that Jacob will limp with from that day forward. Our spiritual struggles take a toll on us. We want them to be easy. We want to grow without hurt. But there's no growth without pain. And we've tried our best, and it still ends with divorce. It leaves us wounded. It's not the end of our lives by any means, but probably walk with a limp, bear some scars. When we felt betrayed by a friend or a child, a parent or an employer, we're never really the same again. But never being the same again can either lead to spiraling downward or, in the lovely phrase of Richard Rohr, falling upward. Jacob is wounded, but he won't give up. He's not willing for this night to end unresolved. He will not waste a crisis. The man asked Jacob to let him go. Jacob holds on for dear life. Literally. The man asks his name. Jacob. He answers, it's who he is. It's the only way he's ever known himself. He's the trickster. He's the con man, the deceiver. Served him well the first half of his life, but now he knows. Living without integrity like that won't work forever. And so he admits it. I'm the heel. I'm a sinner is what he's saying. That's all we need to be able to say, about ourselves. If we're ever to know life as grace. The man tells him he's getting a new name now. You will be called Israel. Israel, meaning you have striven with God and prevailed. Or maybe it means God has striven with you and God will continue to fight for you. It's hard to say what it means exactly from the Hebrew, because Hebrew is like that. What we do know is that somehow here, right there, God is now in the picture. Jacob understands It's been God he's been wrestling with all along, and it's a blessed standoff. God hasn't killed him, and Jacob hasn't defeated God either. They've been engaged in a contest of wills, and they both come out of it changed. The novelist Nikos Kazantzakis, who wrote Zorba the Greek and The Last Temptation of Christ, he tells the story of a young man who visited a monk in one of those Orthodox monasteries that are out in the Aegean Sea on a cliff where they carve out these cells in the side of a cliff and they live like hermits, you know. Well, this man climbed up to the cell of an old monk and he asked, "Father, do you still wrestle with the devil?" The monk answered, "Not anymore. I've grown old and the devil has grown old with me. He no longer has the strength. Now I wrestle with God." "With God?" the man asks. "You wrestle with God? Do you hope to win?" "No," he said. "I hope to lose." Frederick Buechner calls this Jacob story the magnificent defeat. But see, losing to God is really winning. It's a blessing in disguise. "Tell me your name," Jacob asks the man. "Who are you?" he wants to know. God doesn't give away God's power like that. Instead, God just blesses Jacob precisely because, I guess, he hung on and wouldn't give up. Because he wouldn't let God go, no matter how painful the struggle. This is a kind of man God can use. Wounded, but woke. Right? Richard Rohr again. "Mature spirituality will always teach us to enter willingly, trustingly into the dark periods of life, which is why we speak so much of faith or trust. Transformative power is discovered in the dark, in questions and doubts, seldom in the answers. Yet this goes against our cultural instincts. We usually try to fix or change events in order to avoid changing ourselves. Wise people tell us we must learn to stay with the pain of life without answers, without conclusions, and some days without meaning. Who are you?" The man Jacob wrestled with asks him that question. Then Jacob asks the man that question too. It's a question of identity and how we derive it. And we find out that we only find out who we are through the struggle. The song, "Who Are You?" is by the British rock band The Who. Seems apt, don't you know? We hear it at the beginning of CSI. You know, if you don't know the whole song, you know, "Who are you? Who, that one, you know. With all the hoo-hooing, you probably don't get the storyline, though. And it culminates the story of a man who has waked up drunk from a night in Soho, only to find that he isn't dead, but that maybe grace has found him. And it sounds like a prayer. "I know there's a place you walked where love falls from the trees. My heart is like a broken cup. I only feel right on my knees. I spit out like a sewer hole, yet still receive your kiss. How can I measure up to anyone now after such a love as this?" Well, that's really the point, isn't it? We don't have to measure up to anyone else after such a love as this. Once we are loved as we are, we are never the same again. We know who we are, or better, whose we are. I don't know all your stories in this room today, but here's what I believe. While each of our stories is different, all our stories are the same. If you haven't wrestled all night with God yet, you will. There'll come a time in the struggle when you'll think your life is over. But then you'll find that it's only the life you have known that is over. There's another life waiting for you to live. Another you waiting to emerge by the grace of God. You can tell people who've been through it already, I think, if you pay close attention. They've all got the slightest hint of a limp.